first time back home, your mom hasn't seen you in like months or whatever, and when you left, you had this cute little Squirtle, and he was like maybe just sticking out of your backpack, like
right.
Squirtle, and then you come back and you have this giant Blastoise and like at least 5 other like giant Pokemon,
all these
like,
badasses.
And it's not even a big town. Like even if you just had those 6 Pokemon like wandering around Pallet Town,
right?
what are they gonna do?
Just got a Gyarados living in the pond. Yeah, we don't have any problems with crime anymore. Gyarados just blows them up.
There's definitely not room enough for your Pokemon and your rival's Pokemon. So I wonder if you can just sort of like find a new place to live.
Hi, I'm John, and I'm a gamer.
Hi, John!
Gaming has come a long way over the last several decades. The debate on whether the medium is art has largely ended with a very conclusive yes, and around the world we're finally seeing people treat it with more of the respect that it deserves. With that in mind, and because I'm just as much of a game talker as I am a game player, I went around to all my gamer buddies to enlist their help in discussing games as art. So, if you love gaming as much as I do, then join us. Trust me, you're among friends. Listen in as we discuss the themes, gameplay, and whatever else comes to mind. It's like a book club, but gaming. Today's topic, Pokemon, Red and Blue.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Book Club But Gaming. I'm John, your host, and with me today are Sami.
Hello.
And Adrien.
Hello. And
we're going to be talking about some nerd shit. In particular, we're going to be talking about the first generation games of the Pokemon franchise. Now, before we start the conversation, I know everybody brought questions, and we can go ahead and get to those. But first, I just wanted to play something. Alright, so we all grew up with this franchise, and I think all of us, to some degree, played them when we were kids and when they were first coming out. How did that make you guys feel, just to hear that whole 8-bit rendition over again? And I know we've been playing through it in preparation for this, but what does that bring to mind?
I mean, for me, I think it brings to mind the very first time that I got a gaming console of any kind. I was on my way to travel abroad with my family, and without telling us, they took us to, like, ahead of time, they took us to Toys R Us and picked up a Game Boy Color, and then I got Pokemon Red, and my sister got Pokemon Blue, and so we got to play those on that flight all the way across the Atlantic to Europe. So that is like what the intro sound really brings to mind for me.
Nice. And when you started playing it, were you like on the plane for your first time booting it up?
Yeah, I think I was either in the car when I first booted it up, or I was on the plane. I'm not sure anymore because it was quite a while ago, but it was definitely that trip was the very first time that I ever saw the game, heard the game. I knew about Pokemon. I'd been excited about it. I think the anime had been out for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that game was my very first actual game that I owned.
That's awesome. And you probably got a good ways into it on that trip before you even got to where you were going.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 10-hour flight.
How about you, Adrien?
Yeah, I mean, that really brings back some nostalgia for me as well. I think I had a Game Boy for a little bit before I got Pokemon, but there's still a picture of me somewhere in my parents' attic of me with Pokemon in my Game Boy, just kind of lying next to the Christmas tree, just absolutely intent and focused on it. Like Sami, I think, Pokemon had kind of been a thing for a while. The cards blew up when I was in elementary school. And then once that started becoming more interesting, I think I was probably in 4th or 5th grade, and I got the game as well. And I mean, I just played the hell out of it.
That's awesome. My own history wasn't quite at the start of it. Much like you, both. I had seen it around like the schoolyard. Everybody had their cards they were bringing in to trade. Everybody had their Game Boys. I thought there was this one kid, I can't remember his name or his face, but I remember thinking he was so cool because he had his Game Boy just sort of lying on the table in front of him, and he wasn't holding it. He was just sort of tapping the buttons, and I thought, oh, that's the kind of game where you can do that. There's not like timed jumps or anything. You can just make your selections, movements, and whatever. And I don't know why that stuck with me in my head as something that was so cool. But when I finally got my own copy of the game, I was not disappointed. That was my first time hearing that opening theme. Was the first time I actually got to play it. So, I didn't know anything like that was going to happen. I didn't know that there was going to be that Gengar versus Nidorino animation. And it just totally set the tone for me. So moving into that...
Actually, that reminds me a little bit. It's a very interesting choice of Pokemon, right? Like, who fights a Gengar versus a Nidorino? Like, it's just not a common matchup, I don't think. I don't know that I've ever actually even done that matchup ever in the game myself.
Probably not, me either. I wonder what the impetus was for that decision. Like, how do you decide on those two Pokemon out of any of them? If you two were going to choose any two Pokemon from Gen 1 to be in that opening scuffle and try to eliminate in your heads the fact that it's always been Gengar and Nidorino, which two do you think would be, iconic?
Yeah, I think, maybe two of the starters, like Charizard versus, Venusaur or something like that, or because it's red and blue in the States, Charizard versus Blastoise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me as well. Or possibly some of the early Pokemon, that you see in the first half hour or hour of the game, Rattata or Pidgey or something like that, because those are just so immediately recognizable, and they're the first things that you're going to have in your party in addition to your starter.
That's true. And I guess Nidorino is pretty early game too. You can get it as soon as Vermilion City, I believe.
That's
right?
true, but then Gengar is
way later. And I guess for me, and I can't remember exactly how I felt at the time, and of course going back to play through it now, I have such a history and memory of the game where it's I know whereabouts I'm going to find Gengar or I guess Ghastly, and all that. So, but I think as a kid, I wonder, for somebody who had never played it before, if you're thinking, okay, what are these two monsters? When am I going to find them? You find the first one pretty early on. You're like, okay, where's that other one? Where do I even get it? And Nidorino, you don't need to evolve or trade to evolve to get, but Gengar you do.
Right.
So I think some people who didn't know that, I wonder if there were anybody who played all the way through the game, never had anyone to trade with, or just never thought to trade a Haunter, and never realized that there was okay, where do I find this Pokemon?
Yeah, so I think one thing that brings up that's interesting is that this was before widespread internet access. There was the internet, but things like GameFAQs didn't exist, and a lot of that lore about how to get Pokemon kind of got passed around the schoolyard, where somebody would be like, oh yeah, such and such, they got a such and such thing, they did it this way, and some of that information was accurate and a lot of it wasn't. But I think part of that experience was that everybody's trying to figure it out. There's that one guy who actually has all 150 Pokemon, and he's like, how did you do
the
it?
coolest kid on the schoolyard.
And I think going from that as well, I think one of the big things was at that time, there's not a lot of prompts within the game for a lot of this information. It doesn't have a index or a whatever. The Pokedex has some information, but it's by no means complete about how you can get them, especially not in this generation. Later on, it does tell you, or at least help you a little bit about where to find some Pokemon. But at least for me, I remember that the way that we played the game was by having the game guide, the magazine. If you didn't have that, you were never gonna get even close to being a completionist in Pokemon, because you just had to have that information that wasn't available in the game.
Yeah.
Do they even make game guides anymore? Physical printed game guides anymore?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Such a
Because
blast.
nobody would buy it, or if somebody, or one person would buy it and then upload everything up, to the internet. But
real collectors play with game guides. I think. Go ahead.
I was going to suggest, before we get too far into this, maybe we should talk about which versions of the game that we've played.
Okay, yeah. So for the purposes of this recording, just beforehand, I did a complete playthrough. Well, not complete. I didn't catch every Pokemon, but I played front to end, all the way to Mewtwo, of Pokemon Red.
I played Pokemon Red, but I didn't actually end up getting to finish all the way through. But
you finished it before.
I have finished it multiple times before. I don't think I've ever actually caught all 151 either.
Me neither.
Yeah, me neither. For this, I actually played the remake, not the Game Boy Advance ones, but Pokemon Let's Go Eevee.
How are those? I've never gotten to play those.
I don't want to get too deep into the differences between the games right now, but it's a pretty faithful remake. The main thing being that the catching and the box mechanics are different.
And I kind of like that, especially considering where Pokemon has come from and how it has grown, which I have some questions lined up regarding that specifically that we'll get to later. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. And when you were playing Gen 1, like way back when, were you on Pokemon Red or Blue? Blue? Okay, so at least we have a little bit of the spread here.
And then I also played Yellow.
Yellow. Oh, okay, yeah. I never finished Yellow, but I played it.
I mean, it's basically the same game for the most part, except that you start with Pikachu.
Yeah.
And Pikachu follows you around.
And you get to fight Jesse and James.
Right. I mean, there are a couple of differences, but at base, they're pretty much the same game.
Yep.
But
I kind of preferred, especially for Gen 1 games, I preferred Red or Blue because I do love having Pikachu in my team, but I really love having Raichu in my team. And I don't think there's a whole bunch of significant reasons to keep a Pikachu that early in the...
No.
Yeah. It's not until you can get Light Balls, right? In like, what is that, Gen 4 on?
I have no idea. I don't even know about... no, actually, maybe it was Gen 3, I feel like, was the like different ball types.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the ball, it's like a light ball is an item for Pikachu to hold.
Oh, okay.
And I think it doubles his speed or something like
something
speed
like
stat
that.
or something like that. But until then, he's not as useful as Raichu, which honestly, even from a design standpoint, I love Raichu, especially early gen. He's this chubby little mouse rat, you know, super cute.
Cool.
But yeah, that's good. And I can't even remember which Pokemon are specific to
which version.
Which versions do you guys? Can you remember?
Oh man, not off the top of my head. I know, for example, that like it's really hard to catch a Weedle in Blue and really hard to catch a Caterpie in Red in Vermilion Forest.
I think one of the biggest ones is Growlithe and Vulpix.
Okay,
So
right.
Vulpix was Blue only, and Growlithe was Red only.
That's such an interesting choice to me because the fire types are
Rare.
They're so rare in those games that you're really going to divide them up between the two versions. But
I think that's the reason that like Charmander is often considered the best starter, is because you just don't get many other good fire types to even pick from.
And then they have to go ahead and make that the hard mode because you got to deal with Brock and then Misty right away.
Yep.
For my playthrough this time, I chose Bulbasaur. And I named him Nugs.
Actually, that's a good question. What is everybody's favorite starter?
Ooh.
Historically, Bulbasaur was mine. I just liked the look of him. And then I really liked the look of Ivysaur, and then I thought Venusaur was incredibly ugly. But I really liked those starters, even though it's probably on the whole the weakest one because it has so many weaknesses being a grass and poison.
Yeah, for me, my original, my OG playthrough was with a Squirtle, but at one point I decided as a kid, I was like, I'm going to reset my game, I want a Charizard. And so that's been my my go-to since then. And the Charizard playthrough, especially the early game, is a pain in the butt.
Yeah. I mean, for the Gen 3 remake, for Fire Red and Leaf Green, at least you can get Metal Claw on your Charmander. That'll help with Brock. Then hopefully you figure something out for Misty by the time you get there. But for Gen 1, you were just sort of like grinding, I think.
Yeah.
Like, especially the rock type is so...
I think you could get a Bellsprout.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that.
I don't know that you can, actually. Not before you hit Brock, but the one that you can get is a Nidoran female, which learns Double Kick, which is a fighting type attack.
Oh, that's cool. See, I never thought about that.
But that's very uncommon. It's in that same patch that you can get the Nidoran male in, but it's very uncommon to get it, so you have to often like really spend a lot of time in that grass patch to find one.
So they're not version exclusives?
No,
they're just rarer. Okay, that makes sense. I never came across a female, and couldn't have made that work for me. For me, I was really glad to have Bulbasaur just because it's sort of I got a lot of games to play right now. I want to be the hardcore guy who's gonna kick ass with just a Charmander, but I just don't have time for it right now. But what do you guys think of just like the amount of grinding in general that you have to do in those early games?
I think I think as a kid, right, not having any context for these kinds of games, like it was just normal. But looking back on it now, it's especially I think in the early game, before you hit like Misty's gym, that's that whole, you know, period of time up until that point, I think that is very, very slow. And then after that, I think it goes fairly quickly all the way up until you get to Victory Road and start heading towards the Elite Four, and then all of a sudden you hit another brick wall. But between those, I don't think it actually, I don't recall it being that bad.
Yeah, I agree. Where I think there's more grinding required if you don't understand the mechanics of the game as well.
That's true.
Sure.
So, like, if I'm playing, I already know, you know, I know who the gym leaders are. I know the type weaknesses. I know what Pokemon to look out for, and generally the grinding isn't too bad. And it's mostly just, you know, beat whatever stuff pops up in random battles, beat the trainers, and you're mostly going to be fine. But if you're not playing optimally, if you're 8-year-old me, you might be doing a lot of grinding because, you know, you hit, say, Lieutenant Surge and have a Squirtle and don't really know how to deal with that.
Man, I can't imagine. Like, I think the way I play a Pokemon game now is whatever my starter is evolved before I hit the first gym, like just for convenience sake, and then everything else I try to relatively keep up in terms of levels. So if you're going into your first gym with like level 16 Pokemon, usually you don't have a hard time. I think one of the difficult things about Generation 1 though is that they start with a rock type gym leader, and if you don't have a type advantage or anybody who can deal decent special attack damage, you're going to have a hard time with rock type Pokemon.
Especially because, again, in Gen 1, like, there's either it's not very effective or not effective at all if it's electric, or then it's super effective. There's no moves, basically, I don't think, in Gen 1 that are normally effective against rock types.
Really? Okay, see, I didn't even realize that. That's troubling.
Yeah,
but then you get to...
think of any.
Yeah.
I think the only thing might be like Bide or like Wrap, where, you know, the damage is just a basic level, right? There's no...
Oh, Psychic would be. If you
you're right.
Yeah, Butterfree that learns Confusion will do
Right.
that.
See, I didn't even get a Butterfree for this playthrough. But again, I had Bulbasaur. So.
But yeah, I think that is an interesting choice where I do wonder if that was intentional, where it's like the game designers are forcing the player to understand the type system at least a little bit in order to get past this first wall. You know, they want you to know, hey, types matter, and if you try to just tackle your way through rock, you're not going to make it.
I think that's a good point, and especially, you know, playing through the game, I was trying to think of what really set this game apart, aside from the Pokemon collecting, which of course is the big thing, but in terms of raw battle mechanics, the type advantage is something that's leaned into heavier in Pokemon than I think anything before, and maybe even since. I mean, there have been some Pokemon clones, sort of like basically Nexomon Extinction is basically Pokemon with types and stuff like that. Works a little differently, but still, like, you think of Final Fantasy, where, yeah, okay, that's like a fire monster. If I cast Ice Magic on it, it'll probably be more effective, or, you know, but nothing as deep as having... How many types are in the first generation?
I want to say 12 or 14.
12
There's
or
a lot.
14. Yeah, but like way more than any other JRPG I can think of at the time, anyway. And
yeah, and I think Pokemon really... That was the first game that had a really impactful type system that was so complex. I can't think of any previous games that had something like that. And afterwards, you know, now everybody was thinking about Pokemon as the model for the type system. And, you know, type systems after that are really heavily influenced by Pokemon.
It really changed the game, like the industry as a whole. That being said, there are certain things about the way that types work in Gen 1 that I think they just hadn't quite figured it out yet. Obviously it wasn't very well balanced with dragon types and stuff like that, but then I brought this up in the conversation with you, Adrien, how I was like is flying type not super effective against grass type in Gen 1? Like, what's going on here? And you're like, well, Gust isn't even a flying type move.
It's a normal
Right.
type. It's a normal type.
and that kind of thing is all over the place.
Yes.
In Gen 1. I think
Yeah,
Or
I
I
can
think-
actually go into some details about that if you like.
yeah, go for it.
So there is a bunch of type weirdnesses. One that really stands out to me is that Dragon type is technically weak to Dragon type, but the only Dragon type move is Dragon Rage, which always does 40 damage.
Right.
Similarly, the only Ghost type move, Ghost is supposed to be super effective against Psychic, but the only Ghost type move is Nightshade, which deals set damage based on your level. And even worse, every Ghost type is also...
A poison type.
Yep. Because it's just the Ghastly line, which means that all the ghosts are actually weak to Psychic.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, it's not as bad as the ghost thing, but the fact that poison was such a common, like, cross type, secondary type, and so that meant that there were really almost no pure grass type Pokemon in the game. I think the only one is
Tangela.
Tangela, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so weird to me because Tangela is
A really bad Pokemon.
not a good Pokemon, but also I always would have expected out of any of them. That looks like a poison type Pokemon. It looks like some kind of...
That's true.
It looks like a gillyweed from Harry Potter. Right?
Yeah, and worth mentioning is that if you play the remakes, if you play like Fire Red and Leaf Green, while the new types that were added in order to combat Psychic, Steel, and Dark, there's only a few Pokemon whose types got updated in the remakes. Magnemite is the one that stands out to me, which is also Steel.
Steel Electric, yeah.
But there are now widely available Steel and Dark moves that Pokemon can learn. So, for example, Bite is Dark, and everything learns Bite. So now suddenly Psychic types are a lot more vulnerable in the remakes, even though that there aren't, your Houndooms or your Sneasels or your Steelixes.
Yeah, and I think that was, just going back to Psychic was just so incredibly powerful in Gen 1 because it had basically super effective moves against all ghost types, almost all grass types, all, fighting types. And then it was also, right, like we talked about, it's the only type of move that was normally effective against rock types. So it's just like you needed to catch one of those Abras in Cerulean City and level that up to a Kadabra.
Another interesting thing there is that in Gen 1 there was no special defense stat.
Oh, right.
It was only special, which means that if you had a high special stat, like, say, Kadabra, not only did you have great attack, but you also had great defense against other special attacks. And even worse, the most powerful physical attackers, fighting types, were not very effective against you.
Yeah. And then going back to the Abra, and you were saying having to catch him, like... Just thinking, I did try to catch an Abra this time, and I just gave up after a while because I didn't have anything that could put him to sleep.
You didn't catch a Jigglypuff?
No, actually I did have Jigglypuff, but not until after I gave up trying to catch Abra. And I was
I
like,
just YOLO Great Balls until I get
it. Keep going.
Yeah, because I got one just before I entered Rock Tunnel on the way to Cerulean City.
Yeah, nice.
But that builds to this idea, and something that I think they actually did start doing pretty well from the get-go in Generation 1, which is each Pokemon, a lot of them at least, feel different, whether in trying to catch them being a hassle or how you evolve them. You have to trade this one, you have to give this one a special kind of stone. And all of that would get expanded upon in later generations, like you need to level up your Eevee at midnight with max happiness in the forest, and then you can get... But, like, how different do you guys think the different Pokemon felt from each other, especially different lines of Pokemon from each other? And do you think that those differences warranted the sheer amount? Because as I mentioned before, I guess their original idea was like, we'll have about 50 in there, and then it got to the point where they're like, well, we have over 200 and we need to cut it down. So do you think they chose a good 150?
Yeah, I can start. So overall, I think they're pretty well differentiated, and in situations where they are similar, there's a nice dichotomy. So like I mentioned Weedle and Caterpie earlier, they're not version exclusives, but one is much rarer in each game. And I think it's like you start out with two little bugs and they both evolve into cocoons, and then they both evolve into a big bug. And like I think that's a nice introduction to like the evolution mechanics, and you can kind of see like, oh, these are sort of similar, but then they become something different. So I think that's like a pretty good success. There is some times where like some Pokemon could feel pretty samey. Like what's the difference between like a like a Growlithe and a Ponyta, it's, you know, you kind of run into them at the same time and they kind of do the same thing. But I think the instances of that are fairly few and far between. For the most part, I think the differentiation is pretty good.
Yeah, I would agree. But I do think that there's, you know, differentiation in terms of like style, and then there's also differentiation in terms of usefulness. And there's a lot of Pokemon that are just not, there's no reason for you to ever use them. You know, their movesets are really bad, or their stats are really bad. And this is, you know, true throughout a lot of the different generations, but I think even Gen 1, where there's fewer of them, there's still a really like remarkable number of Pokemon that you never want to actually use because they're just so bad.
This is true, and I think Gen 1 had a particular problem where this is before the physical special split with moves, so like all fire moves are special type and all normal moves are physical type, and that means that there are a lot of Pokemon whose moveset didn't quite gel with their stats. So you have those Pokemon where it's like Voltorb, which has high attack but is an electric type. So you have weirdnesses like that where it's like, dude, with the exception of a very narrow use case, you're not going to use Voltorb.
Absolutely. Like I think I had a couple of Pokemon that I kept in my party for this run through specifically because I was like, you know, I never actually tried to use them, like make them useful, and it really made me realize, okay, Arbok is just not a super useful Pokemon. But I took my Danger Noodle, which is what I named my Arbok, all the way to the Elite Four, and it saved my ass more than once because I kept Wrap.
Yeah.
And if you get a successful Wrap, then like suddenly the other Pokemon can't move. And I can tell you how many times I'm like, I should be dead like 10 times over, but you just keep falling for this Wrap.
Yeah, that move was way too strong.
It was the only thing that made it useful. Like,
yeah.
Like even when I got Bite later, I think it was like, again, not a dark type yet, so it was just not a super helpful move at all.
Yeah, I think the only good poison move in the game was Sludge, and I don't think Arbok learns Sludge.
No, I don't think so either. I never got the option anyway.
Yeah, so its most powerful move is like Slam or something. It's just...
Yeah, I think it's only Coughing and Wheezing and then like Muck to get it.
Yeah, and none of those Pokemon are particularly good either, although I guess Muck has some... I think it had some competitive applications.
Yeah,
it's like a huge tank.
Did it have Toxic in the first gen? That was like
you could teach Toxic to pretty much anything because it was a TM.
Okay, but I feel like it might have learned that move, and was it in that generation where it had like the extra powerful poison?
Yeah, the damage kept doubling. I think it was really brutal.
Oh man, I wish I would have picked up the Muck. It would have been so helpful.
Yeah, you can teach Toxic to something like basically anything.
Oh, okay.
I think it was one of the moves where nearly every Pokemon could have the TM used on it.
But I believe it doesn't do any damage on its own. It just gives it the super poison effect.
Like the later Will-O-Wisp. Yeah. But here's the thing. I ended up throwing away a lot of the TMs that I got because I'd be like in a facility and I'm like, okay, I'm looking for the key card or whatever, and I have already got a full bag, and I don't want to run all the way to the Pokemon Center every time I pick up a new TM to drop it off into the PC. So there were like certain TMs where I was just like, what is that? No, I'm probably not going to use that. Goodbye. And then, so that kind of leads me to another point. Like the bag system would change in later versions and later generations, and we get pretty much limitless space for certain things. I mean, you'd be kept to 99 Pokeballs, but you could have Pokeballs, Great Balls, Ultra Balls all in one place. Do you think that the limited bag space was an important part of the way Pokemon worked? Because again, as Sami said, it's not a game that tells you what you're going to need to do and when, what you need to carry with you and when.
I have to be honest, I didn't remember that there was limited bag space in Pokemon Red because I never got to a point where I filled it.
Okay.
I purchased so little, so little stuff, and I would just use things that I completely forgot that was even a feature. But if I'd probably gotten to the end of the game, I probably would have been wrangling with that all the time and kind of frustrated with it. So
yeah, I mean, I think the limited bag space is pretty clearly a technical limitation, where they kind of allocated a certain number of slots on the game's save space on the cartridge, and I think that wasn't intentional, and that's just sort of they probably hoped that you didn't run into it too much. But, I mean, honestly, to provide a counterpoint to myself, they did provide you with your PC that you can deposit items in.
Yeah.
So there should have been at least some reason for it, but I don't think the limited space is a particularly compelling mechanic. Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I think that because you only have the one bag in the first gen, it is very easy to just go to your PC and just dump all of your TMs in there, because you don't need those in a timely manner, right? You just need them when you want to teach something to a Pokemon. You don't need to have them with you all the time.
Yeah, or if you're 8-year-old me, you use the TM immediately.
Who can learn this? Thunder Punch.
Oh, cool! I'm gonna teach Bide to my War Turtle.
Yeah, but for me again, I was trying to get through the game so quickly, and I was just like I think I did a couple of times when I was in the game corner, the Team Rocket hideout. I kept on finding TMs and it's like, oh, wonder what this item is. That's probably the MasterCard, but I can't pick it up because I have like 6 TMs. So I'm gonna run back to the Pokemon Center, dump them all, come back. No, that was a TM. Okay, moving on. And then I think it got to the point where I had already run back twice, and I was like, well, it's either unload all of my super potions and all of the other actually day-to-day, like battle-to-battle useful items, so that I can just limitlessly pick up everything inside this building, or I could just start tossing TMs, which I know I probably won't use, like Bide, to be honest. But then I ran into this other problem, which is there are certain moves where your Pokemon pretty much needs to learn this move before it's actually useful. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the Pokemon won't learn those moves until late into the game, or like late level. Like I think Pikachu or Raichu won't learn Thunderbolt until like level 50 or something like that. They actually
never learn it in the base games.
Okay. So I did end up giving him the TM for Thunderbolt, but...
Yep, I think in Yellow they changed it so that Thunderbolt is in Pikachu's moveset, but in the original games it's a TM-only item, or move.
Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, okay, so we don't have a huge, heavy move pool, I don't think, in Gen 1. And do you think that there's any kind of a discrepancy between the fact that you have all these different kinds of Pokemon, like which we just said there were some that was like, okay, what's the difference between Rapidash and Growlithe or an Arcanine?
Yeah.
Like, they really can't learn any different moves, and their stats aren't all that different, and especially if you're an 8-year-old, I'm not really paying attention to the slight differences. I'm like, well, that one looks cooler, I guess, but...
Yeah, so I think overall, there are a lot of moves in this game. More than something like an equivalent Final Fantasy game with the spells. Like, there are a ton of moves in Pokemon, but there's just an incredible amount of content in the game for the time. Mm-hmm. But the number of moves was still not sufficient to give each Pokemon a really unique mechanical identity, and we started seeing in the second generation where that started getting better.
But I also think there were a lot of moves, again, in Gen 1 that you just never used.
Yeah.
Maybe, if you were playing, I guess, competitively, there were some people who actually did want to use, Leer or Growl. But I basically never used those moves in my playthroughs. Mm-hmm. Because I'm just like, why would I spend a turn, slightly lowering their defense when I could just hit them twice and probably do more damage than... unless you're really fighting something that has a huge hit point pool,
right?
Which is a very niche case to have a move that you're mostly not going to use.
Yeah, and some moves as well were insufficiently differentiated in Gen 1 as well. We mentioned Gust, which is a normal move for some reason, and is basically the equivalent of Tackle, or it's slightly better. And Lick is basically just Tackle again. So you have some moves that would later on get more identity, but in the originals, they were just kind of there. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks at least somewhat to just how much content there was. When it's a small team, a lot of those oversights can happen pretty easily.
No, for sure. And just to touch back on that, there's definitely a lot of content in this game. We could talk as much as we want about it 25 years later. They didn't even have this yet. They didn't even have this yet. But again, to put it back into the scope of the time, and I'm so glad that I was a kid at the time that I could play this and just be like, wow, this is amazing. Even the graphics never bothered me. Mm-hmm. And now they're just nostalgic. But back then, you can't make out what the Pokemon you're using is just from the back of their sprite. Like,
Right.
the front sprites are okay, but the back sprite, like, what is that, a Venusaur? That just looks like nothing. Like,
Yeah,
but-
and I think something worth mentioning is, like, this was a Game Boy game, like, on the original Game Boy, and if you look at, like, the amount of value that you were getting buying Pokemon compared to other Game Boy games at the time, like, there were so many games that really, they were just kind of arcade games, you know, stuff like, you know, you could buy Tetris, or you could buy other kind of really limited games, and compared to that, Pokemon provided, it's like, hey, it's got an entire world, it's got all of this content, and yeah, it was one of the more expensive games, but you know, the amount of time that you were going to play Pokemon, especially as a kid, was so much more than most other games that were available.
How many other Game Boy games do you think would have kept you entertained for that 10-hour flight?
I think I played quite a bit of, at one point, the Star Wars Episode 1 Racer for the Game Boy Color that had like a rumble pack in the Game Boy cartridge.
Oh, that's cool.
Did you ever see this?
I never saw that one. I saw the Pokemon Pinball that had the rumble
Yeah,
pack.
so same like form factor, but it was an Episode 1 Racer game. I think I played that one quite a bit. But I'm trying to remember I had a collection of Game Boy Color games, but I feel like Pokemon, the various colors of it for Game Boy Color were probably definitely the most played.
Yeah, and I think that changed a bit with Color. You started getting some more RPGs and such, but original Game Boy, there weren't that many big games developed for it.
Yeah, that's true. And kind of like you with that trip, I remember this one trip I went on with my family, and me and my stepbrother were sitting in the back playing Pokemon. I think we were driving up to Disneyland, and it was like a 3 or 4 hour drive, and we were quiet the whole time. My mom was like, "Oh, thank God for Game Boy. It's just like, for real." This is...
But only as long as you're driving during the day.
And as long as you have batteries.
Yep.
Fully charged batteries. Oh, but then when you get there, and mom's like, "Oh, we're here. We're at Disneyland. Let's get in there." And you're like, "But Mom, I can't turn it off. I can't save in a trainer battle. Like,
right.
I can't run away. I can't." We're here. Let's go. Like, Mom, no.
Yeah, I remember my mom, once my brother and I had Game Boys, one of the critical things that she always had was extra batteries. And also, you mentioned, you know, there was no backlight at the time, and at some point, my parents bought us the like the little plug-in lights.
Yeah, I had one of those
you
too.
could plug it into the what was it, the link cable slot, so that you could, you know, so that we'd shut up when it was winter and we were still driving.
Oh man, that's such memories. Did you guys have any questions you wanted to get into?
So I think we've got kind of a pool of them. So
Yeah.
I think we've touched on a little bit of it, but let's just go through and kind of start from the top.
All right, let's do it.
Cool. So I think our first question is about how Pokemon provides the player with autonomy.
All right, this is probably one of my favorite questions just in general to bring up with Pokemon, especially when we get into the later gens. And Gen 8 had a huge problem with this because of the Dexit issue. But Pokemon has always been about figuring out how you want to play the game and playing it that way. Not only do you get to name yourself and your rival, who I just named Moo Moo this time, because I didn't want to be rude, but I didn't want to give him something cool. But you get to name yourself and your rival, and then you get to choose one of 3 starter Pokemon. So right away you get like player choice of 3 outcomes. And then you get to build your team out of 150 Pokemon, which is really, I don't know how many lines that is, but it's still a lot. And just in general, the whole time you're choosing which 4 moves you want each Pokemon to have. So it's built upon the idea that you get to define yourself in the game through your actions and your choices. And by the end of the game, when you're in the Elite Four and you have whatever 6 Pokemon you've taken in there and you get them into the Hall of Fame, you're like, yeah, those are the 6 Pokemon that I put on my team. I trained them up, and like I gave them my nicknames and stuff like that. And so when I think about autonomy, I think to me it makes up for the fact that I have kind of like a love-hate relationship with silent protagonists, especially in something like an RPG. But if you're going to give me a silent protagonist, you should at least give me some kind of an illusion of choice. Like, okay, that's really trying to represent me. And because of all the choice you get, Pokemon does provide that for me.
I think the other thing to like think about in terms of Pokemon and why a silent protagonist probably works just fine is that there isn't really a story.
That's true.
Right? Like, there's not a story that is fed to you. Your only real story framework is that you're a Pokemon trainer that's going through all of the gyms and then trying to become, Pokemon League champion. But
and stop a global crime syndicate. But you know what?
Yeah, but that kind of happens. That just kind of happens like on the side, right? Because really, it's not. There's not like there is a bit of story around it, right? But really, for the most part, you're kind of just going through this world, leveling up your Pokemon, and you do create your own story to some degree.
Yeah.
But that works when you have games that allow you to create your own story in that kind of way, where there's just a framework that you have to sort of build around in your own head. I think that's a framework that works well with a silent protagonist. Right?
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges with something like Half-Life, where you do have a silent protagonist as well, is that it has a very directed story. Now it's accepted for Half-Life because it's kind of its thing, but in other cases like it, where there is much more of a story being told by the developer to the player, I think that's where it becomes more of a challenge.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth mentioning is that the format used for Pokemon's story and its protagonist really limits the sort of story that you can tell. So it can tell I'd call it like a world-based story very well, where Pokemon's big shtick is like, hey, there's this world that's kind of similar to reality. There are all of these amazing Pokemon, and they can be your friend. But when it tries to tell something that's more about characters or more about other things, it doesn't work so well. Where I think in some of the later gens where they try to make it a little bit more story focused, it doesn't really work. And I think the reason that it falls flat is because of the choices that they made about how they were going to structure the game, and because of that silent protagonist, because it's the audience's kind of stand-in. I feel like some of that railroading, if you will, starts to grate on the player, because they're like, but I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And in the originals, you kind of have a lot of choice about how you want to approach things. John, you mentioned about, hey, you can kind of build your team the way that you want it with the moves that you want. Also, you actually have a lot of choice about how you want to play the game outside of that. You have a lot of choice once you get past the first few gyms about which cities to go to and which gym leaders to fight. Once you get into that area around, what's the main city with Sabrina?
Oof, I don't remember.
Is
that Vermilion?
No, that's with
It's not
Giovanni.
Celadon.
Celadon is with
Erica. Anyway, the big central Saffron City.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get into that Saffron City big square area, you can kind of approach it as you want. There's not like a really heavily set sequence of the way that you approach the gyms. And that's one of the reasons like Sabrina is actually pretty strong, because the developers kind of intended for you to kind of go around that area, maybe even fight Koga before you fought her.
I actually did fighting Koga in this last playthrough, and not even realizing that I was sequence breaking, because I couldn't remember who went where. I think I was actually trying to remember based off the anime, like who did Ash fight and when.
Yeah, and another thing there is that you have kind of that macro level control. You also have a choice in how you want to approach things like the gyms and how to approach things like the routes and the caves. For example, if you want to, you can play Pokemon as like a crazy survival game by not going to Pokemon centers. It's just like, I'm just going to manage with, the items that I find, and you see some of these variations with like stuff like Nuzlocke, or some of the versions where it's like, you can only heal at a Pokemon Center once or something like that. Or if you are a kid and you have a bad battle with a trainer in the first cave, you walk all the way back out, heal your Pokemon, and try again. And the only trade-off there is time.
Yeah. That's true. And like, I think in that way, really, you just have so much choice and so much decisions to make in the game, and meaningful choice too.
Though I think that actually there is a bit of a, problem a little bit in Pokemon with money, and the fact that if you lose a battle, right, you lose some of your cash.
Oh yeah.
And there's, until you hit the Elite Four, there's no repeatable trainer
Right.
battles.
That's true.
So there is a set amount of money that you can have until you get to the Elite Four.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you can fight them over and over again to grind for cash. But up until that point, if you have messed up and didn't buy any Pokeballs and kept losing battles or whatever, you could be stuck in a place where you can't buy more Pokeballs, or you basically just run out of money.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you're kind of locked into either quitting or starting over, or going off the train against some level 30 Pidgeys for however many hours it takes to be strong enough to just muscle your way through whatever's stopping you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I do think that the the whiteout mechanic where you lose half of your money is probably completely unnecessary.
At the time, it was blackout. That's which is such an interesting. I'm not sure exactly why they made that change. I'm not sure if that was a.
I don't know. I feel like it might be more of like a let's do something that doesn't make it sound like a health condition
Right. It's not the result of like violence
on the player character.
Yeah.
You just sort of passed out because the moment was too awesome. And someone took you to the Pokemon Center.
Yep. Yeah, I was never really clear what was supposed to happen there, and I'm not sure it really needs to be explained.
That's fair. I think it's a great choice that they made to, instead of giving you a game over and if you didn't save you're screwed, they just like, you know what, you're going to the Pokemon Center. Although again, you lose money, so there's that payoff.
I think nearly every time I've lost, I just reset and go back to my last save.
Yeah.
Because of that loss of money being
exactly.
so impactful in the first game. Because like later games, yeah, you do have some repeatable. I think the way that they originally did it was like you get randomly called by people. Anyways, I don't want to go into other games too much, but
Oh yeah, with like the Johto, the Pokegear and stuff like that.
yeah.
And before we move on to the next question, back to the autonomy, and I think it's very important to put ourselves back into the position of being 8 years old and thinking like, okay, as a kid, what sort of autonomy are we getting? Because your canonical character is about 10 years old. So what sort of autonomy are we getting from this game that we just can't get from real life?
Yeah, I think, for example, one of the big themes is that you're kind of going on this adventure and traveling and making choices for yourself. I think that's very appealing for children who's, we live here in the United States in 2020 and grew up in a world where we didn't have a lot of autonomy. You had to go to school. You didn't really get a whole lot of choices about where you went or what you did.
If you wanted to ride your bike in the street, it needed to be from this house to that house.
Right.
Otherwise, the kidnappers will get you.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that was so appealing, was it was a little bit of a escapist fantasy for kids, where it's like, oh wow, I'm going off on an adventure, and it's very kid friendly in that way. It's not like you're going to fight dragons or horrible demons or something. It's just like, yeah, there are all these friendly Pokemon.
Well, you do fight dragons, but you fight them with other dragons, so so it's okay.
Right, and there's not really any, especially not in the game, but even in the anime, like there's not a lot of like, oh, the characters are in danger from the Pokemon.
Yeah.
No.
I think
Occasionally in the anime, yes,
But you just get a little singed.
right,
You don't even
right.
get like a bone broken or anything.
Right, and I think honestly that's one of the reasons that it was successful, is that kids were allowed by their parents to play the game because it was friendly, that because they were so careful about how the game's violence is portrayed, your average mother who's worried about exposure to violence is like, oh, that sounds fine.
And it was friendly, but you were still fighting Team Rocket, thwarting a crime syndicate, basically. Lieutenant Surge is a straight-up military man, and you take him on equal ground, which is a pretty cool moment, I think, for a kid. And I think, Sami, you mentioned not really wanting to talk too much about the later games, but I think it is kind of important to compare how that stands to later generations. Again, I'm going to reference Gen 8 just because it is the most recent, and talk about the fact that you are pretty much just like carted along for that entire adventure. And at any point that there's like something sketchy going on, Leon, the champion, will fly in and he'll be like, "Don't you worry about this. I'm going to take care of this. You just keep going on to the next gym." And there's really no way to get lost like you could in the original games. And to me, that really robs you of not only autonomy but just sort of like adventure.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like I've played a little bit of the Gen 8 and I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, there's just a lot less player choice in terms of what you're going to do next. And then also like the world is that so much more controlling of where you're going to go next. Whereas, as much as we're talking about how this was safe in the sense of like a big grand adventure, it also was like, you're just a kid wandering around this world,
Right.
with no supervision. Nobody talks to you, like nobody that you know from the beginning of the game talks to you until you get back home
Right.
after beating the Elite Four. That's the first time that you have to go back and talk to your mother.
Right.
Just like, how'd it go, honey?
Right.
Yeah, and later games do address this, where like your mom will call you every once in a while, and we'll check up on you a little bit more. And one thing that reminds me of is that because the game was on the original Game Boy and because there were such limitations, there wasn't a whole lot pointing you where to go. So, like, for example, Kid Me at one point reset his game coming up onto Cerulean because I was just stuck there. I couldn't figure out what to do, and I was just like, screw this, I'm just going to start the game over and actually have a game to play. Because I didn't realize that you had to go into that one house that the rockets broke into in order to get out of Cerulean after you beat Misty. And because of that, because the game didn't railroad you, you could get stuck.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, and I'm pretty sure that's probably the beginnings of the way that I tend to play RPGs in general now, which is I go and talk to every single person in every single town,
In every house,
every little nook and cranny, because otherwise you might miss something.
and Pokemon really does reward that explorative spirit, as much as it doesn't maybe outwardly incentivize it. Once you get to the point where you're doing that, you're suddenly being rewarded left and right. The very beginning of the game, and this is something I remember needing to be told on the playground, you can just go straight to your PC and you get an extra potion.
Yeah.
Like that's a big deal, and that to me really stuck, and to the point where any other JRPG that I play now, I'm constantly thinking, okay, is there like a chest up here that's going to have some high level weapon I shouldn't have this early on, and oftentimes I'm disappointed, but I like thinking that there might be.
It's like every single waterfall must have something behind it.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes they do. Yep. And those are the ones where you're like, oh, I'm a genius.
I don't know. I think at this point it's more like if there isn't anything, you're disappointed in the developers for not doing the thing.
Right.
And then if there is, you're like, oh, that's a cliche.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
So,
there's no winning.
Right.
Not in 2021.
Right. We're just, cynical gamers now, and it's like there's no outcome of behind the waterfall that will make me
feel any sort of way.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can find from going into houses and stuff. So, for example, you can, I think you get strength. I think you get strength. You can get surf. You need to talk to a guy, and he's like, "I lost my dentures."
Yeah.
Oh, and that's in his dentures end up being inside of
one of the trash cans
the,
in Lieutenant Surge's gym, was it?
No, it's in the Safari Zone.
Safari Zone, yes.
Right, yeah.
And I had no idea that that's where I needed to go. I ended up needing to look that up on even my own most recent playthrough. Just I was like, where the fuck do I get those? But
but you also get the bike voucher by just walking into somebody,
Yeah.
walking into a building, and they're like, "Here, have this."
Eevee.
Well, and the first time you go into that bike shop, if you go in before you get the voucher, they're like, "Hey, we can sell you a bike. It's $1 million,
Yeah, Pokebucks.
Oh my god! As a
Actually,
kid,
that was the question that I had was, what did you guys call the currency in Pokemon?
I guess Pokebucks. I never thought of it anymore, but that sounds right to
I
me.
think we called them dollars.
Dollars.
I don't know why, but the thing at my school was they were called pikes.
Pikes.
No idea. Probably just because it looks like a P a little bit.
Okay,
and somebody made that connection. Was like, that's what they're called, and that's what we went all with.
That's fine. As long as everyone knows.
I think they may officially be Zenny or something.
That makes more sense now. But they never say it in the game.
Nope.
They just have the little symbol there, which I, as a kid, would have had no way of knowing what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that there are a lot of ways in which the exploration is very rewarded. For example, I think you can get Moltres fairly easy. He's just sort of sitting there on Victory Road, and all you have to do is go down one set of stairs instead of up the set of stairs right next to it. But then if you want to find any of the other legendary birds, you need to go to, I think, for the factory, the electrical plant? Power plant,
The power plant, yeah.
Which is an optional area entirely.
Which you might even never even realize it is. Even when I went to go find him in this playthrough, I was like, shit, where is that even? Okay, I know it's in this region of the map. And then I don't even remember where Articuno is.
So Articuno is in the Seafoam Isles, which is not developer intended is an optional area. So this is another kind of funny unintentional sequence break, which is that once you have beaten, I forget exactly what, it might be Koga, but once you've beaten him, you can actually just fly back to Pallet Town and surf down.
I ended up doing
to
that.
Cinnabar.
Again, to save time, I was just like, I'm just going to go straight for it.
Yeah, and like Seafo Miles are not my favorite area of the game. It's pretty tedious. You've got like the ice puzzles and stuff, so I normally skip it. Even though Articuno is my favorite legendary bird.
Oh, okay.
Zapdos was mine.
Mm-hmm.
Zapdos, I think Zapdos was probably mine out of all of them as well. But I think they're all pretty sweet. Apparently they have new types now for Galar forms, but
that's cool.
we don't need to get into that too far. But want to move on to the next question?
Yeah, so while we're talking about our favorite Pokemon, what's our favorite Gen 1 Dream Team?
Ooh, that is a good question because my standard team back in the day was very much not an optimal build, right?
Right.
But it probably included Pidgeot, Butterfree, Venusaur, and then likely some more reasonable choices after that. I'm pretty sure I had some kind of fire Pokemon, and then Kadabra, right?
Not Alakazam?
No, because
you had to trade for him?
You had to trade for him, and the other thing I think was that when you traded a Pokemon, right, they would gain experience more quickly, but I also, if I recall correctly, they you'd have to have like a higher level badge in order to control them. Yeah. And so like I didn't want to do that for such a long time, and then eventually once you can control any Pokemon, I had gotten attached to the Kadabra.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. So I think one of the, like Sami was saying, it's a little bit hard to decide on the dream team because it's like, well, there is the team that like I had the first time I played through the game, and then there's like every time I play the game again, I like kind of go in with this like, hey, I'm going to do something a little bit different with my team. So like the dream team for me is like, it needs to be some sort of combination of like some of my favorites, but also something to like kind of round out the team and make it something viable to actually take through the game. So for me, I chose Charizard because it's still like probably my favorite starter. Jolteon, probably one of my favorite Pokemon entirely. I mean, you can see I've got an Eevee literally inked into my skin.
Yes. It's very badass.
Thank you. I had to choose. I chose one of the trade to evolve Pokemon, so I chose Alakazam. But like Gengar and Machamp are both like amazing pokes on their own. But in Gen 1, Gengar just isn't that good.
No.
If you can go to a lot of trouble, you can like teach him Thunderbolt so that you can use his nice special attack. But like Gengar is actually like, if you just use his own moves, it's like you have Hypnosis and Dream Eater, and that's kind of his jam. Just because of the limited moveset. Then I had Gyarados. That's always just a fun one. You pick up that early Magikarp and evolve him, and
so much work. And that's one of those things that I wouldn't have done unless I'd heard on the playground. No, like, oh yeah, Gyarados is the dream. Like,
yeah, Gyarados. I mean, he's a heavy hitter. Although there are a lot of good water Pokemon in Gen 1.
That is very true. I think water is one of the best, like the widest variation of water or like of one type that have really good move sets, right? Most of the other types you have like one or two that are the clear best. I think unless you're talking legendaries, which also add an extra one, but
but I mean you've got Gyarados, you've got what are they called, Starmie, also a great Pokemon. It picks up that psychic type. You've got Dugong, which has the ice type stuff. You really have a lot of options for water types. You've got Seeking, which can learn some flying type moves, which is actually great if you have to fight some grass types. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of options. So my last two are Dragonite. Big pain in the butt to get, but it's just a beast.
Yes.
And then Nidoking to kind of round out. You've got some kind of normal attacker in there. It can learn some fighting moves. It learns Earthquake. Just a good poke overall.
That's awesome. That's a great list. My list is very influenced by this most recent playthrough because a couple of them were I only chose because I had never chosen them before. And I was like, oh, let's make it work. But first of all, Venusaur, definitely big. I've always bounced back and forth between all 3 of the Gen 1 starters. So earlier you asked that question. It's kind of hard for me to actually answer. Like, what's my favorite starter? It's like sometimes I'm leaning this way, sometimes I'm leaning that way. But for this list, I'm putting Venusaur in. Diglett is my all-time favorite Pokemon. But for the sake of efficiency, I evolved him into Doug Trio. And then Arbok, again, never saved my ass. I can't not like you. I can't not love you. And then also wanted to get one in that was a trade-only Pokemon. So that was, for me, Gengar. I didn't get to put him in this list because I couldn't trade, but if I could have, I would have put, I would have finished with a Gengar in mine. Hitmonchan, Primeape. I know they're both fighting types, but they're both just so cool, and I love the idea of having 2 fighting types that could like kind of spar and train with themselves. Because
Nice.
I'm fantasizing about my journey. It's more than just what I'm seeing on the screen.
Yeah.
And then finally, I wanted to put in at least one of the that you get the fossils, and so Aerodactyl. To me was pretty cool because just flying type, of course, and then also just the whole lore of them being a prehistoric Pokemon, which is just, again, going back to the variety of different like ideas that you have for what a Pokemon could be and where you can get them. You have to get it from a fossil. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially because you get it pretty early on in the game, and then you have to hold on to it for a very long time.
Yeah, it's really a Chekhov's gun where it's like, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that stands out there is, just what a meme that became in Twitch Plays Pokemon, where they had the Helix fossil.
So,
because it was always in there.
do you know Twitch Plays Pokemon and
Yeah.
the whole like saga? Okay. Because that... did you guys watch it as it was happening?
All right, so I have not seen all of Twitch Plays Pokemon. I have in the past watched videos on it. I've seen little mini documentaries on it. I've seen little clips from it. But since both of you have so much experience with it, how about you fill me in?
Sure. I can start. So this happened, I want to say it was like maybe 2012?
Yeah, I think it was 2012.
Yeah, 2012. So I was in university at the time,
Me too.
and basically somebody sent me a chat at the time saying, dude, check this out on Twitch. So, we're in the middle of class watching the initial minutes of Twitch Plays Pokemon as like more and more people are just piling in. And what somebody had done is that they just basically they started streaming Pokemon, and then they linked up all of the inputs to Twitch chat. And initially what it would do, it would choose a random message in the last second or so and use that as the input into the game. And more features were added, and eventually it got a little less chaotic, but really that initial idea is what really kind of made the genre. And it was so popular because, one, everybody remembered the game, and two, the idea of just this hyper chaotic playthrough of Pokemon was just amazing. And we were talking a little bit about the whole lore of everything, and before our break we mentioned the Helix fossil and all of those memes, and maybe Sami, you want to talk about some of your favorites?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things was the difference between at the beginning everything, it was all I don't remember, it wasn't called chaos, it was
Democracy.
Well, no, it was the other one.
Oh,
so
the
you had
other
democracy versus
Anarchy.
Anarchy, yeah. So it was all anarchy, which was just basically a random input would be selected at the moment when it was time for another input. Or it wasn't even random. It was like the most recent one when the game was ready for a new input to be put in. But then the game ran into a problem where there was one section where you had to get across this one portion of the game from left to right, and there were a bunch of ledges, and if you dropped off of a ledge you had to go all the way back to the beginning, and I think that stalled the playthrough for like 12 hours or something like that.
It was a long time.
It was a very, very long time.
I think that's where a lot of people ducked out after the first hour or two.
Yeah. Because you just constantly had a couple of spoilers who would put in down inputs often enough that it would never make it all the way across.
Yeah.
And so then they implemented democracy, which was a mode where basically the most voted or the most commonly named, like movement would be the one that was done every couple of seconds.
Yeah.
And that allowed the game to get through it, but then they implemented a voting system where you could vote to either have it in democracy or in anarchy mode. And so, a lot of the community wanted to play as much of the game as possible in anarchy mode, and then there were just some of these portions of the game that were just impossible without it. Like, for example, the Safari Park was one of the most incredible moments, because if I remember correctly, I believe they actually got through the Safari Park and finished the thing that you needed to get out of it, which was, I forget what, it was some HM, I think.
And the gold teeth.
And the gold teeth. Mm-hmm. They managed to get through it in like one try in anarchy mode.
Oh my god.
It was just an incredible, and I think they finished it with like 2 steps left.
Wow.
But it, it was this incredible moment of just like, it just happened to work out. Or they captured Zapdos.
Mm-hmm.
Like they managed to catch Zapdos in anarchy mode.
Right. Yeah, and I think some of the things that really stuck with people was the things that happened in anarchy mode. Mm-hmm. So, like the Helix fossil, of course, was a huge meme just because in anarchy mode they just kept opening up that the item screen and trying to use Helix fossil and have saying that's not the time to use it right now. But also, like, a lot of the Pokemon's names were these ridiculous things like VV, or like ATV.
ATV was the Venomoth.
Venomoth.
And so he became known as All-Terrain Venomoth or something.
All-Terrain Venomoth.
Yeah. Helix became known as Lord Helix.
Right.
And was juxtaposed against the usurper Omanite.
I wonder how many like lifelong friendships and companionships were forged inside of that chat, and I'm thinking particularly in the moments like on that ledge where you're literally just watching nothing happen for 12 to however many hours.
I don't know that many people actually got to know each other in the chat, because I don't know if you saw it, but it was just flying by.
Oh, okay.
Like the chat was constantly flying by with commands because it was just people spamming the commands.
Yeah, at one point I think there were over like 100,000 people in there or something ridiculous.
Yeah. So, but really the community that grew around it was on the Reddit. The subreddit for Twitch Plays Pokemon, and that's where I think a lot of stuff definitely happened, because there were all of these artists that were creating incredible art related to the Twitch Plays Pokemon run.
Yeah, and eventually, the milestones in Twitch Plays Pokemon would be all over gaming news. Twitch Plays Pokemon finally, beat whatever, or got through this. So it was really an event.
That's so cool. I'm so sorry that I ended up missing that. But that's...
yeah. I mean, I remember, I went to bed one night and then I woke up in the morning to check it, and there is like a huge amount of content that came out about how they I think they called Pidgeotto was Jesus. Yeah. Or Jesus.
Yeah. Or Jesus.
Yeah. And there was just like this huge story around Bird Jesus and how he somehow saved the game from like Twitch Plays Pokemon from accidentally releasing like the Zapdos that they just caught. Because which and Zapdos was eventually named Battery Jesus.
Right.
But basically, there were a couple of moments where they nearly accidentally released their most important Pokemon, because they had to they caught the Pokemon, but their party was full, so it got sent to the PC, and so then they had to go to someone's PC and get the Pokemon out of the Pokemon box. But there's the option to also release them, so they just disappear forever, right? And they did actually release, I forget what Pokemon they released, but it was some pretty important one that they really wanted to keep, and that one was on Bloody Sunday. When they released that really important Pokemon.
Yeah, so I think, talking about Twitch Plays Pokemon, it really opens us up to talk about kind of the different ways that people have played Pokemon over the years, but also just all of the media surrounding it, where Pokemon, the game, didn't exist in isolation. You know, we talked a little bit about like the anime and about the Pokemon cards, but I feel like because those were happening at the same time, it really affects our perception of the games as well. Where, you know, if we mentioned the graphics a little bit, the graphics in Gen 1 were pretty janky. And I think a lot of people's perceptions of what the Pokemon really looked like were shaped by the anime and by the cards, which had higher quality art.
I know mine were, and we talk a little bit about favorite starters and how that's such a hard thing for me to come by, is because when I'm imagining the Gen 1 starters, I'm not picturing them in any of the games. I'm picturing the original trading cards that they had, and the artwork on them is super nostalgic to me.
Yeah, and if you look at what they look like in the game, they're facing away from you, and they're mostly just kind of little gray blobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the especially the anime, at least for me, was the bigger one. Like, I did collect the cards, but watching the episodes and, you know, sort of following the story in the episodes eventually kind of got you through a lot of the same parts of the world as you see in the game.
Yeah, definitely.
And obviously they're not a one-on-one mapping by any means, but it still gave you a lot of context and made it feel so much more real, you know, going to the SSN, you know, which in the game is just, like, it's a top-down view of some rooms that happen to be on a ship, but then you have the episode on the SSN in the anime where, you know, they eat a Pokemon for like the only time where you know what Pokemon it is. You really don't ever otherwise see someone eat something, but except for that one Magikarp on.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think because I watched more of the anime before I finally got my hands on the game, you're right. Like when I got to the SSN, I'm like, wow, this is where it happened. And like, the actual SSN ended up being kind of underwhelming, but that didn't negatively impact. I was like, well, I can kind of mix the canons in my head a little bit, and it definitely made it such a grand adventure.
Yeah, and I mean, you could really use your imagination, especially as a kid, where it's just like, I can see it. So one example I was going to bring up is the Pokemon Center in the game is a box. It's just this little boxy building. You go in, and there's a few things that stand out, like the healing thing, and you know, you've got Nurse Joy, like it's not Nurse Joy, but it's like a nurse there who will take your Pokemon, and there's like a computer in one side, and I think some of them might have like a table or something. But it's not showing you very much. But then in the anime, you know, you had Nurse Joy, the character. You had, you know, the Pokemon Center where this whole big thing, and you know, that really shaped what I imagined it looked like in the game.
And there were like patients or clients waiting for their Pokemon, like sitting around. There were like video phones on this wall, and
you had a Chansey pushing around a cart.
There was the artwork of Ho-Oh was up there, and Ash was like, "Oh, I saw that Pokemon," and Oak super gaslit him.
Yeah. No, you didn't. What are you talking about?
You're crazy. You've always been crazy.
Right, and the decision for like Brock and Misty to be main characters when like they're pretty minor in the game, where they do that like the Dragon Ball Z thing where Ash beats them and then they become party members.
Right.
Well, though Misty became a party member before Ash beat her.
Oh, that's true.
Because the bike was the whole thing.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Right, and then Misty was like a lot of people's first crush.
Oh, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Even though in the American version there was some censorship done on her design, like,
was there?
No, I'm thinking of the manga actually, but there was a manga.
Yeah, there was also a manga.
To get into that, the manga is brutal. Like Pokemon die left and right, get sliced in half and stuff, and that is just an interesting thing to me because as a whole, Pokemon the franchise has only gotten more and more child friendly in my eyes. But the manga has always remained this kind of one area of it where things could get really hardcore and interpreted very differently.
Yeah, and I think that was a lot of people's first brush with Japanese media and the existence of like, oh, there's like a manga out there, like what is this? You know, wait, it's way more brutal. There's like censorship involved in some of this stuff, and that was a lot of people's gateway into that media, and also some of the difficulties that come with importing something.
Yeah. What other media were there, even just at the time? There was the games. There was the trading card games. There was the trading card video game.
Man, yeah.
Which I played.
I did.
I beat it.
I played it. Yeah, I don't think I ever beat it. I don't think I was good enough.
Really, really hard. It was so hard.
Probably harder than it had to be.
Did you guys actually play the trading card game? Like,
Yeah.
did you battle
Like,
other people with it
In
ever?
real life?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
You did though?
Yeah, I actually played it. I had some decks. So the game is very similar to Magic in some ways, Magic the Gathering, and different in others. But you know, the basic idea of like they simplified the type system down a little bit. There's some confusion where like Dragon type is normal in the card game, and like Ground is fighting, and a few more things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But so they simplified the type system down. Things only have like a single resistance and a single weakness. And there's the whole idea of like you have to attach energy to your Pokemon in order to use their moves. And that's kind of the resource system to prevent people from just stacking their deck with the best attacker. But you know, you still have the evolutions where you know you've got a card for each evolution, and if you want like a Venusaur, you need to start with the Bulbasaur and evolve it into an Ivysaur, and then evolve it into a Venusaur to make that work. So the card game didn't really resemble the playthrough of the video game at all. Is what I'm getting at. You know, your deck generally needed to be one or two types, just because of
There weren't enough energy cards.
Yeah, there weren't enough energy cards. You get energy screwed. You know, if you have 5 different types in your deck, it's like, well, I've got my Charmander, but I only have electric energy in my hand or whatever. So it worked pretty well for a card game, especially a simple one that kids could play. But it also lacked a lot of the depth of the like, oh, you build the team with the types and everything. But overall, I'd say it was pretty freaking successful.
Well, it's kind of like being in the shoes of one of the NPCs in the game, which is only ever going to have like 3 Pokemon.
Oh, that's a good point.
A level 39 Pidgey. Like or anything like that. So that's kind of cool. But again, I guess it does kind of force you to move away from the sort of... I mean, there's nothing stopping you from filling your deck with as many types of Pokemon and energy cards as you want. It's just not going to be an effective way to win most of the time.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember what your first Pokemon cards were?
I don't remember exactly what my first Pokemon cards were, but I remember that I had a Pidgeotto, which was like from a very, very early version of the card game that had the like rare, you know, like little star, but it wasn't holographic. And also it wasn't the final evolution, so it shouldn't have had a rare symbol anyways, because all the rares are final evolutions.
Yeah.
So it was like a really weird card that I ended up with, and I'm pretty sure I have it still somewhere. But
Extra rare.
yeah,
The only Pokemon... I do remember opening my first pack of Pokemon cards, and the only thing I remember from it was that there was a Weepin' Bell in it. And that was the first time I'd seen the Pokemon, and I was like, holy shit,
What
that
is
looks
that
rad.
That's pretty cool. When I was a little kid, and this is before I got any of the Game Boy games or anything like that, and I was just finally being introduced into Pokemon, which had become a culture at that point.
Yeah, it was huge.
Again, keep coming back to the schoolyard, but that's literally where I was. And some of the older kids were having a Pokemon battle, and I just kept on asking questions like, "Oh, who's that one? What's that one? Who's that one?" And they're like, "Do you have any cards?" And I was like, "No." And I guess I must have looked really pathetic because one of them took pity on me and gave me a Rattata. And that, to me, you know, it's just a Rattata, but I was like, oh, I was so excited. I think my parents were reluctant to buy me any of the cards because they're like, you're not gonna take care of them. Like, they're right. I probably wouldn't have, but maybe to spite them. Once I got my hands on that card, I was like super careful with it. I remember my older brother had this tracing paper because he liked to do drawings and stuff like that, and to me it was just semi-opaque enough to where it's like I could make myself a makeshift sleeve for it. So I did that, and I was just super proud of my little Rattata. And honestly, I think it is very nice, and it lends itself really well to the card game structure, even just from a collector's standpoint. Because I remember how many people, I'm sure you both at one point, or maybe still, have like a binder somewhere.
I do, yeah.
With all the 9
Yep.
9 pockets each sleeves, like.
Yeah. having a whole bunch of content that's easily recognizable. You've got 150 Pokemon. They figured out some other cards. But people really were after the Pokemon, and I think that can segue us nicely into just talking about Pokemon as a media franchise, where it is the most profitable media franchise, period.
Yeah, definitely more recognizable, I think, arguably, than Disney at this point. Like, Disney's everywhere, but Pokemon is everywhere, and especially in the 90s when it first came out, there was no getting away from it. There were the parade floats and the Macy's Day balloons and all of that. Like,
yeah, Pikachu is probably one of the most recognizable characters in the world, and it does make it a little bit difficult for us to review this whole thing, just because there is this enormous diaspora of other stuff related to the games.
Yeah, it's inescapable, and just everywhere. We have Pokemon Legos. We got Pokemon foods. Oreos are coming out. They're coming out with Oreos that are like special. There's like 6 Pokemon that they're gonna have designs on the Oreos and stuff, so it's not just the package. But that stuff is still happening, and it's still going strong.
And then you also get new things like Pokemon Go was a huge thing.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I feel like that one was a sort of a turning point in a way where it really got older people back into it, right? I think that there was definitely a point where Pokemon for our generation had sort of dropped off in popularity.
Yeah.
Little dip. I never played Gen 4 for that reason, because that was
same.
right in that period where I was like, Pokemon's not cool anymore.
Yeah, I missed everything from 3 until I think 7, Alola.
Yeah, I think I played 4. What was 5? What was Gen 5? Unova
region, which was
X and Y?
Snivy, Tempig, and Oshawott.
I feel like I didn't play those ones. Yeah, I think I stopped at Gen 4, and then after that I came back for Gen 8.
Yeah.
And I haven't finished that yet either. But
Yeah. Did you have another question regarding
that?
that?
I think let's move on to our next question. So, does the game feel like a grand adventure even today? And if so, what ways has it stood the test of time despite some outdated mechanics and graphics?
I think I definitely felt like I was on an adventure. I think, again, because of all those reasons, I had recent experience with Gen 8 where I was having my handheld through the entire thing. It was just nice to get out into this game where literally nothing was being explained to me, and I just had to kind of figure it out. I really enjoyed the variety of different things. Again, for its time, there's so much content in there. Each town has its own little musical theme. There's like a slight shift. If you're playing on a Game Boy Color, at least, there's like a slight color shift when you go into new areas. Even though you're dealing with like just copy and paste of the same building blocks all the way through, you get the same grass patch, same
the tile set,
same tile sets. I felt like the way that they were designed and engineered really did kind of build the world for me. Like, you have very iconic locations like that cliff that you need to walk single file across, which is perhaps more iconic now because of Twitch plays, but even at the time I would remember it. The bridge in Cerulean City, all of that. So to me, all of it felt very iconic, and I can't speak as much to how much of that is nostalgia, but I definitely, it made me feel that way as a kid, and it made me feel that way again now. And I think more so it felt like a breathing world than some of the newer generations.
I'll say that I actually have a little bit of a different feeling about it coming back to it at this point, because like I mentioned before, I played the Pokemon games always with the like Pokemon guide that had all of the information about every single portion of the map, and that was how I played Pokemon. And coming back to it now and trying to go through it without any of that information, I was constantly kind of going like, oh, am I missing something in the map? Am I, am I missing like a certain Pokemon that I should be catching in this area, because I can't remember anymore all the details of all the different routes and exactly what's where. Because that was how I played with that knowledge before. I wasn't really discovering it on my own, so I definitely played it in a very different way than I think you played it originally as a kid. And that definitely colored this playthrough, and I think also then just on top of that, the fact that obviously there's been a lot of years and a lot of games in between when I first played it and now, and it really does, it feels older, and it feels I can see much better where the game world has its limits than when I did when I was when I played it as a kid, and so I think that sense of adventure may not be quite as strong for me anymore as it was originally, but I think that's just also partly because I simply don't play RPGs that much anymore. I don't find them as compelling. I don't think it's really necessarily anything wrong with the game. I think it's still a pretty good game. It does what it does quite well, despite the weaknesses that we've already sort of talked about. But
yeah, I'd agree. And there is definitely some magic of, everybody was playing it and you were sharing tips and everything. And that's just not really something that happens anymore now that we're adults. And, we don't have the time to carefully pick our way through the entire game in order to find everything. So I would say that some of the adventure has gone out a little bit, but that I still think that the basic game type really does lend itself well to that, and I think the game stands up pretty well once we look past some of the initial janky mechanics and the pretty bad graphics. But I do feel, like John said, the environmental storytelling is there. So I'd say kind of a middle road there. Definitely play a remake instead of the original
or the other thing that I think makes the originals much more playable is playing it on an emulator where you can speed up the game speed.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Having to walk through, especially all the way up until you can get the bike, would have been very painful, because there's a lot of because you have to do so much. We've talked about this already, but you have to do so much grinding in the early game, and having to do that at normal speed would have been excruciating, frankly.
Pokemon is a very slow game.
It's like even every battle starts like, and then the character starts slowly moving across the screen, and it's like a silhouette at first. Like, yeah, I know it's a Geodude. Yeah, I know it's a Geodude. Yeah, I know it's a Geodude. Okay, leaf.
Yeah, I think just to talk a little bit about pacing, the game is very slow, sort of just moment to moment. I do think one thing that Pokemon does well for the Grand Adventure is, like we said, there's a lot of content. And, 8 gyms, you've got routes and, caves in between them. I think it really set up what the RPG world should look like. Taking, obviously it wasn't the first. You had other games with that kind of field and town structure. But the fact that it's all on the same scale, you're legitimately walking everywhere. You never go into the route map and just quick travel somewhere to another point of interest. You walk through the entire game, and I think that gives it a really nice sense of place.
Yeah.
Even if the pacing does suffer a little bit, especially when you're going through freaking Mount Moon. Zubat number 17 showed up.
Yeah.
God, yeah. I prefer the Zubats to the rock types that you'll fight in there, just because, again, it's hard to deal with a rock type without the right Pokemon. But honestly, because I could have done for the rock types, I'll just throw my Bulbasaur out there and just have him wipe him out. But there wasn't really anything I had to combat a Zubat quite as efficiently.
Though the other thing, though, is that you could get away from a Geodude just fine. You could run. Right,
Zubat would confuse you.
Right, you can't run from a Zubat because it has too high of a speed stat.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know that.
Whether or not you could run away from Pokemon was related to the speed stat of the Pokemon you're fighting and the Pokemon that you currently have out.
Oh, that's interesting. Zubat really was a uniquely terrible Pokemon. It's a random encounter. It's fast, so you can't run away. It has Supersonic, which confuses you.
And then it also has like the drain, whatever the drain type move
Leech
is.
life.
Yeah, leech life. So especially if it's fighting something that it's super effective against, like then you can't even hurt it because it's healing.
Yep.
There's this going back into like the expanse of Pokemon media outside the games, but this is actually a fan thing. Was the Super Effective comics? Did you guys ever read that?
I don't think so.
Yes, yeah.
And there's this is basically somebody playing through Pokemon Red, the original, and just every time there's something funny, they make a little one-page comic about it. When they got to Mount Moon, there's this part where he keeps running into Zubats, and so he just at a certain point just started catching him, all. This is the fastest way to deal with him. Just catch him over, and then he went to like his Pokebox, and it was like 800 Zubats or something.
I mean, there is also the repel, which is important. Like,
Oh, that's true.
You know, you get told about it as like a way to avoid. It's actually pretty good because it's in Pewter City, and there's like a guy walking around a garden, and you go and walk up, talk to him, and you get this. Don't tell anyone, but like I'm spraying repel to keep like Pokemon out of my garden, and you're like, oh, like repel, because it's repel in all caps. And you're like, oh, that's what that does. Keeps Pokemon away. But then that's another thing that doesn't actually get explained in terms of a game mechanic within the game, which is that repel only works it works better as long as your first Pokemon in your party is a higher level than the Pokemon that you'd be randomly encountering.
Yeah, and it also has a limited number of steps that you can use it. And if you're young and get lost in Mount Moon, or if you're old and get lost in Mount Moon, your repels will run out.
Yes. And and you're just right back in the middle of it.
Yep.
And then my favorite thing in a situation like that is to have my Diglett, because then I don't need an escape rope.
Yeah, you can
just use dig. Like, oh, I guess we screwed up this time.
Which again is actually, that one is also introduced by another character talking about using dig to get out of somewhere.
See, I missed that.
Yeah.
But I actually kind of really like that in terms of world building. That to me adds to the adventure. But you were talking about how this character was like, shh, don't tell anybody. Like, what that kind of leads me to think, okay, maybe there's some kind of a stigma, like kind of like using pesticides in your garden. It's like, don't use repel. Are you kidding me? That's so bad for the environment. And that sense of realism brings to mind to me another big, I don't want to call it a critique, but something that people bring up about Pokemon a lot is it essentially dogfighting? Is it animal cruelty? Is that like the thing going on in this game? Or is it a little more nuanced than that? And to start that, I do want to say, as I was playing through the game, I was trying to keep an eye out for any instances of people, being like, oh, you should love your Pokemon and trust your Pokemon and be friends with your Pokemon. And honestly, to me, there wasn't anything like that stood out until the very end of the game when you finally beat your rival for the final time. And suddenly Oak comes out and is like, it's because you didn't trust and love your Pokemon enough and treat them as partners.
Which, by the way, is a really terrible thing to tell your grandson who's 10 years old.
Oh, he's awful. The whole game, he's awful to his grandson.
Yeah, like, Professor Oak is such a dick to his grandson.
No wonder Gary is such an insufferable prick.
And like, have you guys like heard or like read this fan theory about like how what happened to your rival's like Pokemon when you meet him in what's the place with the cemetery, the town?
Oh yeah, Indigo.
We just went over this.
Lilac.
It's on the way eastern side of the map.
Yeah,
it's not Fuchsia City though. It's Lavender Town.
Lavender Town. Yeah, which has the really like sad music the whole time.
Right. And the Pokemon graves.
Yeah. Like, have you guys heard this theory that like basically when you fought him the last time, he wasn't able to get his Raticate back to a Pokemon Center in time, and it died. Jeez. And so he was in Lavender Town burying his Raticate. And then you come in and you beat his ass again. And like basically it kind of brings together this whole sort of like fan story about how there's your rival just gets beat down over and over again over the course of the game, starting with like his grandpa being a douche to him, and then going through and you then beat him over and over again. You basically accidentally kill one of his Pokemon that he loved, like his loved Pokemon, and then in the end he like works through all of his grief, and he's never like really aggressive to you, and then he finally makes it to beats the Elite Four, and then you come in and you beat his ass again, and then his grandfather comes in and is like, you didn't love your Pokemon enough, and
Yeah.
Can you imagine if you and your dog you're just like doing a dog show or whatever, just for fun, and then you lose, and your grandpa's like, hey, it's because you didn't love your dog enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even worse if like this was like your new dog that you got to replace the old one that had died, and that you loved so much, and then the grandpa's just like, nah.
Yeah, there were a few instances, especially in the original games, where a little bit of that kind of shines through a little bit. Like you see some trainers with whips. That's something
That's true.
That was gotten rid of in the
Sabrina
later
had a whip,
games.
didn't she?
Yeah, she had a whip. The Rockets, some of the Rockets have whips.
Yes, that's true.
Though, I mean, the Rockets having whips is a little bit more understandable because they're supposed to be the bad
They're
guys.
actually
right,
criminals.
right.
Yeah, they steal Pokemon, so it makes
Yeah.
sense that they would mistreat them.
But yeah, it exists in this sort of cartoon fantasy universe where Pokemon fighting is okay and they don't really get hurt, except don't look too closely at some of the stuff in the anime, like the first episode where Pikachu gets beat up by sparrows and is like clearly dying.
Yeah, it was very heavily implied.
Or a few episodes later where Charmander nearly dies because
Right.
the flame almost goes out.
Yeah.
Right, and this is early stuff, and I think it's pretty clear that later on, this is all very conveniently whitewashed.
Yeah.
Except not in the Pokemon movie.
Oh, that's true.
What happens in the Pokemon? Oh,
Like the one with Mewtwo?
doesn't Ash die?
Yeah.
Yeah. But none of the Pokemon. In fact, if anything, the Pokemon are twice as alive by the end of that movie as when they start.
But yeah,
They're
it's
clones.
This sort of weird cartoon space where the fighting isn't that bad, and the Pokemon aren't really getting hurt, and et cetera, et cetera.
And it seems like the Pokemon really are this sort of, they can't really consent in the normal sense, but at least like the world is constructed in such a way that it's not really unethical for them to
Yes.
be
Right.
doing these things, but
Like in the anime, you're like, Bulbasaur wants to fight, I think. Bulba! And it's like, we're not even going to ask.
Yeah.
But if they really don't want to, I guess that in the only reason they wouldn't would be because your level isn't high enough. Then they will just not obey you.
like Charizard.
Right.
Charizard does,
doesn't listen to Ash a lot of the time.
Right.
It's so funny. I was honestly a little disappointed when I got a Charizard and it listened to me all the time. When I was a kid, I was like, I kind of thought this would be a little funnier.
So did you guys have other like rumors at school about things that could happen in the game that were clearly not true? And I mean, obviously it starts from I think the missing number thing, which is true that you can duplicate items by going like basically doing that sequence of events.
Yep. There was also the rumor about that car in the SSN area where there's this like truck on a little bit of island in the SSN area, and there's this whole thing where you can sequence break and get surf by the time that you get to before SSN leaves, and you can surf there, and the idea was you could like use strength and push it out of the way and there'd be a Mew there.
Oh yeah.
Now if in fact you do this, it is possible to do that sequence break. You can't use strength on the truck. I'm not sure why that tile is there. You can only see it like I think as the screen is fading out when you leave. Maybe it's an Easter egg. Maybe they had other plans for it, but there's no reason to do that.
The other really weird one that I heard from school and was clearly untrue was that there was some other like weird move that was like I think called like Hyper Blast or something, which wasn't even isn't an actual move in the game, that would allow you to break some of the big stones around Pallet Town, and then because there's like a field of grass to the west of Pallet Town, and so the rumor was that you could somehow get over there and catch some like really strange Pokemon that were outside of the 151. But that one was definitely not true.
Yeah, there were also some rumors about like there's a secret like town off of Victory Road or a secret area of the map, which is obviously not true. In the development of Pokemon, I believe the game barely fit on the cartridge.
Right, so they couldn't leave anything extra on there.
Yeah, and the only way not to talk too much about the later games, but the only way that Silver and Gold were able to have so much larger maps, because they have all of Kanto and Johto, is that Game Freak had another, I think, a Nintendo programmer come in and help them compress the game's files down in order to make all that extra space.
You mean we got a budget and some help this time?
Yeah.
Oh boy. That's a little bit of trivia that I came across, and this is a little bit of a tangent that I thought was just really interesting, is that apparently they were having a hard time figuring out how to have this world and have your character move around in it and have the space for that. And so the solution that they came up with was to actually have your character stay in one space and have the world move around you. Like in Futurama, the spaceship engine moves the universe around the spaceship instead of the other way around. I just thought that was kind of cool. Like, there's a lot of really clever stuff going on in the programming of this game.
Yeah, programming for the original Game Boy was very, very difficult. There were a lot of limitations on how you could position sprites and the size of them and everything like that. So the ability to have a fully scrolling world like Pokemon has required some pretty intense engineering.
It's interesting stuff.
I think the other interesting little tidbit about the actual Game Boy cartridge was the fact that you can't save games anymore on the original Pokemon cartridges because the battery that they used is dead by now.
Yeah.
And it was a volatile storage solution because they didn't have real non-volatile dynamic storage at the time, at least not in a size that would fit into the cartridge.
Yep.
And that was even worse for Gen 2 because they had the clocks that had to be on always, even when the game was off.
Yep.
So
because it was tracking what time it was.
So that would die obviously it was enough to play through as a kid, but if you were trying to play it now, it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, so while we're talking about different versions of the game and how things work, why don't we talk about some of the differences between the original game and the remakes?
So there were the added types, which were helpful, but as you mentioned, only to a certain extent because they still weren't throwing tons of Pokemon in there. So the first remakes were Fire Red and Leaf Green, which was technically Gen 3, which means that we got abilities, which was a huge game changer. But those got taken out for Let's Go, Eevee, and Pikachu, correct?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check.
My memory, I'll Google it right now, but I think that there were no abilities in the Let's Go games. So just now looked it up, and Let's Go games do not have either abilities or held items, which is super interesting because those are, were there held items in Gen 1?
No.
So
that was a Gen 2 thing.
So this is a total revert back, which means I guess you could use Earthquake on a Magnemite, which is pretty cool. But do you think that was a misstep to go that far back mechanically, Adrien, since you're the one who
I don't... Abilities generally didn't have a huge effect, but when they did things like having Levitate on Magnemite, I think they were their most interesting when they were interacting with the type system, or the things that were on the starters where if you had low HP it would power up your moves a bit. Those were cool. I think removing the special abilities was probably not necessary. Would have liked to see those in there. Held items, though, I feel like they kind of don't matter. Occasionally a berry will heal a status effect or something, and I know they're important for the competitive scene, but I feel like for your average playthrough you didn't interact with that system very much.
The only thing I think that would be nice to have, because I remember this from Gold, is XP share. When you catch some new Pokemon that's super underleveled compared to the rest of your party, but you want to be using it, but you don't want to have to constantly run back and forth to the Pokemon Center, or fight really low level Pokemon. XP share was so nice.
So that's a nice thing about Let's Go, which is that you're always XP shared. It's just built into the game, and that's. Some of the changes with the mechanics in Let's Go are, for example, you get experience for catching Pokemon.
That's cool.
As well as, you've got the XP share thing, and then also just the box mechanics are different. So if you catch a new Pokemon and your party is full, you can choose what to send back instead of having to immediately send back what you just caught. And also, you can actually just access the box whenever. So you can... That means that it's a lot easier to try out new Pokemon. You know, you don't have to be like, well, in order to do this, I have to go back to the Pokemon Center, load this guy back up. You can just say like, I just caught, I don't know, Weepin' Bell. I'll throw that guy in front, see how he does against the Geodudes that I'm dealing with, or whatever situation. Then I really like that. I think one of the things that the original Pokemon's mechanics that have been extended into basically all the games with the catching mechanics is that you're not really incentivized to catch all of the Pokemon except for the fact that that's what the game is about. You know, oftentimes, like I said earlier, you kind of set out with a team in mind, or you lock in most of your team pretty early on, and when you catch something new, you generally don't use it because of those problems where you have to grind it up, or, you know, you already have a team that you're happy with.
Mm-hmm. Plus, I think the other thing as well that is an issue, I don't remember if it's really that much in Gen 1, but I know that it's the case in a lot of the other generations, is that a Pokemon that you started, you know, like leveling up from a very low level tends to have higher stats than the Pokemon that you catch in the wild.
Yeah, so the reason for this is there's this whole hidden stat system that was even in the original games. And it's kind of weird. I'm not sure we have to get it too far into those details, but basically by defeating enemies, your Pokemon would get this hidden stat that would increase their stats when they leveled up. So a Pokemon that you level up with like a rare candy, it doesn't get any additional stats from winning battles. And what that actually means is that if you know those hidden values, you can target specific Pokemon to defeat in order to raise the secret value for the stat that you want.
And these are EVs and IVs, right?
Yes, correct.
Although I think they worked a little bit different in the first gen than they ended up working from Gen 3 onward.
They worked slightly differently.
Yeah.
I don't know too many of the details, but basically IVs are a random roll when the Pokemon is generated. You know, whether it was put into your box or you catch it, or when you encounter it, I believe. And that will kind of be a random addition to their base stats. And that can go up to from 0 to 31, I think. And then the EVs are the things that you get from winning battles against particular Pokemon. You know, you kill a Pidgey and you get, I don't know, it might be speed. It's like you get 1 point, and then every 4 points when you level up, you get an extra actual point in the stat. So that's kind of the systems that were behind the scenes, varying Pokemon of the same kind. So it was pretty well known that, like, hey, if you catch 2 Abras, they'll have slightly different stats, and that's why. And that gives you a little bit more replayability. It makes the Pokemon feel a little bit more unique.
And then I guess since you're not battling wild Pokemon in the Let's Go games, your only real battles are happening with other trainers.
Right.
Do you think, are there still EVs and IVs? I'm sure IVs, because again, those are generated at first.
Probably.
But you can't as reliably EV train without going out and I'm going to go fight 50 Pidgeys. Right. And just crush them.
Yeah. But overall, I do like the change of, hey, if you want to grind XP, you just keep catching Pokemon instead of leaving a trail of dead Rattata behind you.
That's a good point, because the only way that you get, you know, like after a Pokemon faints, the only way that it gets back up is by going to a Pokemon Center, but, you know, wild Pokemon are not going to the Pokemon Center, so what's happening there?
You could say that Rattata is just unconscious, but that approaching Ekans is not, so unless you're taking it away with you, it's
it's also
dinner.
That's a good question of, like, what do Pokemon eat?
Yeah, and what do people eat?
Well, I mean, actually, it does seem like a lot of, especially in the later part, you know, early on there's meats, but later you really don't see meat very much.
Right, but there's grass type Pokemon.
Yeah, but there's also grass and trees.
There's berries.
Right.
Yeah,
like
there's always
vegetation that is not, you know, Pokemon
Yeah, there's always been that weird dichotomy as well of like, what happens if you have a Charmander out in the rain? Does it like take damage from the raindrops, or like if you have a Geodude and you throw it into a patch of grass, or like the grass blade's gonna hurt it? And like there's kind of technical answers for it's like only Pokemon work, but it's just kind of an edge case of the theming.
And yet Charmander was dying because it was out in the
Correct.
rain.
Correct.
But then again, that's early episodes where I think they hadn't worked all that stuff out yet.
Yeah.
And Ash beat Brock because of the sprinklers.
yeah.
Yeah,
Which somehow made it suddenly vulnerable to electricity.
There's a lot of screwy stuff that goes on in the early anime. I think because the story writers weren't holding too closely to the game's mechanics,
or just hadn't really worked things out yet
Yeah.
about how the internal consistency of the world works.
Oh yeah, that too.
So
I know that there's in game and in anime, there's ice cream made from Miltank milk.
yeah, well,
which is,
I mean, you can also just buy Miltank milk.
yeah, so that's a consumable
gold.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the one thing Sami mentioned where there's a Magikarp that people are eating, and later on it's like, no, people don't eat Pokemon.
That's wrong. Yeah, it used to be way more hardcore. But it's sort of like, I wonder if that same Miltank that you're getting the milk from, if that's like a very coddled Miltank, like, oh, that's just like you would treat veal, like, we don't try to let it get too crazy, or if that's the same Miltank you're taking in to fight like a gym battle or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, if that would affect it, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you get better milk out of a higher level Miltank?
Oh, and also for the internal consistency, there's the Pokemon Snap games, which is probably one of the best renditions of how Pokemon fit into the world apart from the anime.
I agree. I think more so with the original, but I think the sequel, the one that just came out this year, if you play far enough into it, you get the same kind of feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is nice. Yeah, I really like all those things that really kind of fill out the biology of the world and just like how it all is supposed to work within itself.
Yeah, you're going down a river and there are like kakunas that are hanging from the trees. It's like, oh, that's what...
Squirtles are in the water next to you.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's what it's like when you're a trainer, and it's like, you encountered a Squirtle. That's what it's like. And having that, like, oh, that's what's going on in my little Game Boy game. And, that's another layer of being able to... really imagine and picture what that world was like.
That segues nicely, and I know you have a question that you want to ask soon, but before that, one question that I had was if you guys could make any 1 to 2 major changes to the formula of the mainline Pokemon games, what would it be and why?
That's a very good question.
You want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So I think one change that I actually would make that would be not so much adding anything, but I think that it might be interesting to have a Pokemon game in the main line that doesn't have gym battles or anything like gym battles. That didn't have that like gym leader progression, but rather had some other focus in terms of your development as a Pokemon trainer. That didn't center around these big sort of, I guess, set piece battles with a specific trainer. I don't know exactly what it should be replaced by, but I think that like, okay, so you need to go and get the next badge. Okay, gotta get the next badge. Is one of the most formulaic parts that gives structure, but it also, I don't know that it has as much value as some of the other parts of the formula that really do work well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the gym battles do is that in at least the original... In the Gen 1 games, they provide kind of a locus where it's like, hey, this is your goal is to beat 8 gym leaders, and because the game was a little bit more open, they serve as kind of that like, oh, okay, this is where I need to be getting next, and now I need to figure that out.
Right.
Now with some of the later Gen games where you're railroaded already, it kind of doesn't matter as much, and I do agree that it would be interesting to try to figure out a Pokemon game that doesn't center around that.
And as much as I think having big important boss battles with people who have like one specific type of Pokemon, it's very good in like the educational part of it.
Yeah.
I also feel like it's unnecessary after maybe the first even couple of major battles like that, and it's not something that couldn't be built up in another way. Like maybe you just have this one guy that you keep running into in the first hour of the game who always has his like graveler with him or something like that, and so okay, this guy's all about the rock types, and you finally get to fight him, you're like, I better be ready to take on that challenge. Just something to break away from that, because I think that is probably the biggest, most formulaic thing about the actual structure of the narrative is 8 gym battles, then
Championship
Pokemon.
of- yeah.
Championship,
Each one of them is a single type,
yeah.
except Giovanni. But
Giovanni's badass though.
But Giovanni's also kind of like a precursor to the to the Pokemon
to the
League.
Elite Four.
Yeah.
It would be really nice to have kind of those mid bosses who had more realistic Pokemon teams instead of the ridiculous like, oh yeah, I'm the champion, but I have 2 Dragonites, a Dratini, and like it's like, has nobody come here with like a Cloyster or something?
Just never happened.
Just never happened. Yeah. But yeah, so for the things that I would change, coming off of talking about Pokemon Snap, I think it would be really nice to see a mainline title where Pokemon were more integrated into the world, more focus on the environment and less focus on the the trainer battles, like going to the cities. It would be nice. Maybe something a little bit like Gen 8's like open field stuff, but less like the open fields weren't as interesting. The
They weren't really live.
They weren't really alive. Seeing the Pokemon integrated more into the environment would be really nice, and maybe along with that, bring a camera change, something a little bit more behind the shoulder, so that you're a little bit more immersed into the world.
Oh, definitely.
Because I think one of Pokemon's strongest suits is that the world is great, and it really sells an awesome fantasy. And like leaning into that, I think would be really great for the series.
I agree, because that is one of the big disappointments with me with Gen 8 was like, oh yeah, we have this wild area and people were raving about it, but it was just so lackluster. There was nothing important there. There weren't even like interconnected paths that could get you to places faster or whatever.
Yeah, it was basically one giant area outside one of the cities.
Right, like just one open route.
And also the way that you found Pokemon there was still very much like influenced by the older games, right? Like it's still, you go into the grass patch and you're going to find some Pokemon.
Well,
right?
there at the very least, the Pokemon were on the map.
Well, right, they are physically there, but they still like show up in the same way that Pokemon do in the earlier games. Like, yeah, you could see them maybe a little bit ahead of time and sometimes pick which ones you're going to fight, but they're not like really in. They're not really doing their own thing.
Right, they're just standing there.
They're standing there looking for somebody to go and approach.
Yeah,
and also, I mean, I saw a lot of people posting videos on YouTube about getting like a Glaceon in their first hour of the gameplay through the wild area. And I don't know if I just didn't have that kind of luck, but like I was still only running into the kind of Pokemon I could run into anywhere on like earlier routes.
I found some extra variety there.
Yeah, okay, maybe it was just me then. But then there were also like the higher level Pokemon there that you just couldn't even try to catch, which is like, why?
Yeah,
just make it tough.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Why can I not try?
Yeah, so the other thing that I would change, or experiment with at least, is eliminating experience. Make it so that making your Pokemon stronger requires something other than grinding, and perhaps even making it impossible or very hard. Maybe lean into like the systems for like using stones to evolve some Pokemon, but something to make it where you don't where it takes serious resources to have a Pokemon that sticks with you for the entire game. Just so that there's more impetus to try new Pokemon, to use a Pokemon for a while and then kind of grow out of them, instead of this kind of like, I've accumulated my party and now I'm going to steamroll the entire game.
It is kind of archaic by today's standards, especially.
And I wonder if that would play better as well if you had a larger party than 6.
It probably would. Maybe or maybe even something like in Let's Go where your party is more exchangeable. Now in Let's Go it makes the game really, really easy.
Right.
Where you can like kind of bring in Pokemon. So I think some tweaks to that would help bring the difficulty back up. But yeah, some kind of more open party where it is easier to swap stuff out because you don't have that need to like keep leveling your guys up.
Yeah, it feels like a very archaic and artificial way to kind of progress yourself further into the game when all you really, like, yeah, your only real hurdle is the fact that your numbers aren't high enough, and the only thing you really have to do to fix that is invest time into getting those numbers higher. It sort of breaks the pacing of the game and makes it just feel very artificial. But jumping off of that, the biggest change that I would make would be to scrap the battle system altogether and put something in that's a little bit more real time. In my imagination, what that would look like is you're still watching from the perspective, like maybe an over-the-shoulder perspective of the trainer, and your Pokemon is in combat, and if they're not getting commands, they'll default to something, probably based off of whatever commands and strategy you've implemented in the past. But the way that you would give them commands would be like maybe your A button is tackle, and your Y button is going to be gust, and maybe as you get better at building up your combos and strategizing, the more times you have your Pidgey go from using tackle to using gust, the better they get at it, and maybe they can do it much more quickly. The more times that you have your Pidgey dodge, the better they get at that and stuff like that. And I know that would take like an insane amount of work, and it's probably never going to happen, especially for a mainline game where they've pretty much got their formula.
That might be a good format for a VR game.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people have been asking for a Pokemon ARPG for a long time, and I think it would be very popular with longtime fans. But, I mean, it would be wonderful, but it's probably not happening for a mainline game just because the battle format has been so set in stone for so long. But, man, that would be awesome.
That'd be pretty cool. And, yeah, there would probably be just as many people upset, like, why would you change it? It was perfect. But, yeah, I just think that would probably be, to me, the thing that would make it feel more real is just like an actual battle where you're actually, because like, yes, I think you are still a trainer in the games, but the only way that that's really represented as you being the trainer and not the Pokemon that you're seeing on the screen is that you can switch between them.
Yeah.
But other than that, ostensibly you're just playing as each Pokemon, whichever
right
Pokemon,
one after the other.
yeah, right one after the other. So I love the idea of, and then maybe like as they're battling, maybe there's some other environmental thing that the trainer should have to solve, depending on what kind of a plot point it is. Like Ash would have Pikachu and Pidgeotto battling Team Rocket while he's trying to undo the net or something like that. That's holding the other Pokemon together.
Right.
It's just kind of stuff that you could do to make it.
And also that would include that would increase the sort of intricacies of using items, because you'd have to do it in real time as well, rather than just being like, oh, okay, it's time to use an item right now. It's like more like, okay, you got to time it and figure out when you should, and if it's too early or too late. And also I guess maybe can you even use like a potion in the middle of a fight?
Yeah.
Where
like how do you do that? Do you have to get up close to them? Do you have to recall them maybe?
Right.
They can come back
and
to you.
it also makes things like double battles or triple battles potentially a lot more interesting, where it's like, okay, I can control one of my Pokemon, the other ones have to kind of do your thing. You start thinking it's like, oh, it's like a Tales of game, Tales of Symphonia,
right,
or something, where it's that battle system would work fairly well for that kind of party combat rather than one-on-one.
And if they made that kind of a change to the system, I would be much less upset about them having to reduce the Pokemon pool. Like,
yeah, definitely.
Like even if you said like, oh, we can do that, but we can only give you 100 Pokemon to start with, and like, okay, that's fine because it's new, it's different.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't care too much about any of the newer Pokemon. Like at some point, it's just like, okay, there's just too many to keep track of. Even though they don't put all of them into a single game, I know why they need to do it to develop, new content and especially to develop new cards and stuff to sell. But it's hard to care about that many Pokemon, whereas like out of 150 or even 250, like you can know them well enough to be like, I like these ones,
Yeah.
But when it's like you have this, 500 different ones, like I don't know what to use anymore.
I don't even care.
Once we started getting into Gen 3, I started being like, shoot, what is that Pokemon?
Yeah, that's. I think now we're in the 800s, 900s, something like. There's a lot. Like,
there is a lot.
Too many to make a number even mean anything. But yeah, that's the big change that I would make. Did you want to move on to that?
Yeah,
next question.
Yeah, so I think one of our one of the questions that we can use to kind of tie together our thoughts is, what are Pokemon's main themes?
I think it depends on whether you're looking at the anime or the game, right?
I think specifically the game.
Right, because the game has different themes, I think, than the anime. The anime has a lot of stuff about like teamwork and
Friendship.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the game is much more about the types. Like that's one of the biggest themes. Is just like how much the interactions between different types of Pokemon matter. And yeah, there is also some of that, like we talked about with Professor Oak coming in and being like, you have to care about your Pokemon. but I feel like it's fairly superficial. Superficial and shoehorned in at the end. Yeah. Whereas up until that point, you're pretty strongly just kind of looking at like the numbers, right, and trying to find where the numbers can go up. And then one of the other main themes definitely is that exploration aspect, right? That the more you explore, the more you're going to know about how all the mechanics interact. So, for me, it definitely spurred the way that I would approach RPGs in the future, of making sure to check every part of every piece of the map so that I didn't miss some important information somewhere, because it's not stored anywhere else. Like it is nowadays in many games like Mass Effect, where it's like, oh, you missed some piece of data, well, you can go back and read it again later. Whereas here, it's like, if you missed it, you missed it, and also if you don't remember it, you gotta go back to where that you talked to that person and find it. So, I think those are the two main things. Really, is it taught me how to be effective and thorough in exploring a location, and then also putting together a fairly complex system of gameplay in a way that makes that is the most effective possible.
I think you really hit it on the head with the exploration, because everything about the game is meant to like provoke your curiosities, and you're supposed to be curious about all the Pokemon that are out there, and what kind of type advantages there are, and which ones are super effective, which ones are super effective, which ones aren't going to do anything. You're meant to be curious about what's going on in the Safari Zone, because otherwise you might miss the fact that there's important things in there. Even the whole tagline isn't got to be the best, it's got to catch them all.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
You're given that Pokedex, and it's framed to you as a research mission. And you're going out there to catalog information on all these creatures because you're just so damn curious about them. And then along the way, you stop a crime syndicate and become the best trainer in the world. Right. Which is why it's such a funny thing to me, where I've never actually caught all the Pokemon in any of the games, which is only a more and more impossible task. Right.
Even in the original, it was quite the task. So I think that segues. So I identified two themes that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is just the Pokemon themselves. Everybody is talking about Pokemon in the game. You talk to some guy and he's like, oh, I love my Clefairy or whatever. Basically everything in the game is being done by or for Pokemon. Team Rocket, they're thieves. What are they stealing? Pokemon. The world is absolutely bursting with Pokemon, and they are just deeply integrated into it. And I think that's what really sells some of the world's immersion, where it's like, hey, the world is just a section of Japan, but there are Pokemon. And that kind of basic, the real world, but that they chose very well. And that's one of the reasons, along with the amazing character designs, one of the reasons why the franchise is so popular.
I agree.
Then the other theme that I wanted to talk about is childhood, and growing up, and not necessarily the later age growing up where you're finding out about being an adult, but that stage of growing up enough to have some autonomy. And we talked about how it's a little bit like that fantasy of going out and having the adventure. And I think one of the big things is that's one of the main themes, and that ability of a kid growing up enough that they can leave home, and that they can go out and explore the environment around them. And it's familiar, it's still the real world, but it's, you're on your own now. And I think one of the things that really supports that theme is you look at one of the core mechanics, which is evolution, where you start out with a cute little Pokemon and then it grows up and it keeps growing up. And that kind of helps solidify that theme of childhood. And the fact that, we also know that the game's creator was hearkening back to his childhood, when he designed the game, also you can really see those themes there.
I agree. In that way, would you say that it is more of a coming of age story or a wish fulfillment fantasy where your age is already enough?
I think it's probably more of the latter.
I would agree.
Yeah. I don't think Pokemon, there's a little bit of coming of age there, but it's not a traditional coming of age story.
Especially not in the game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You already are a fairly autonomous person in the context of the game, right?
Yeah,
there's nobody, especially in the first-gen game, there's nobody that's looking after you. You're just basically on your own the entire game.
I love that.
Yeah, it's. I think that's a good way of putting it. It's sort of like a wish fulfillment of kind of the ideal childhood kind of growing up. And, in reality, we, grew up past that point and had high school to go to and classes to worry about. But in Pokemon, you've grown up and there's this whole wide world of Pokemon. And you can go be the best trainer ever instead of barely getting to college.
I love what you said, bringing up leaving home with just this cute little thing, and then by the time you, like you said earlier, the only time you really need to go back to Pallet Town is after you've already beaten the Elite Four. So now I'm imagining this is your first time back home. Your mom hasn't seen you in months or whatever. And when you left, you had this cute little Squirtle, and he was maybe just sticking out of your backpack,
right.
Squirtle. And then you come back and you have this giant Blastoise and at least 5 other giant Pokemon.
All these badasses.
And it's just still this tiny house that you live in, where all these Pokemon can go. It's not even a big town. Even if you just had those 6 Pokemon wandering around Pallet Town. Right. What are they gonna do?
Just got a Gyarados living in the pond.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we don't have any problems with crime anymore. Gyarados just blows them up.
There's definitely not room enough for your Pokemon and your rival's Pokemon. So I wonder if you just sort of find a new place to live. Which is why he goes to Vermilion City in the sequel.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, John, any closing thoughts about the themes?
No, I think we wrapped that up pretty well. What do you think, Sami?
I think so.
I think we're sitting here at just over 2 hours, 2.25 hours, and I think that we could probably call it here and be good.
All right, sounds great.
All right, so thank you both again for being on this and for agreeing to do this. This is just so much fun hanging out and talking about nerd shit. So, and thank you all for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope that you can follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this on. This will not be the last time that we all get together and talk about some nerd stuff. There might be new faces here and returning faces there. We're going to talk about RPGs. We're going to talk about action role-playing games. We're going to talk about just action games or even platforming games. Really, with this genre, there is so much to talk about still, and I am so excited to get to it all. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great nerdy day.
There's no outcome of Behind the Waterfall that will make me
Feel any sort of way.
Yeah.